Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Crypto News Podcast. We are buzzing as always, still coming in hot from Mexico. By the time this episode airs, it will be Boxing Day. Want to wish you all a Merry Christmas and hope you had a lovely time with your families. Super pumped to have today's guest on the show today. We have Arjun Bhuptani, the co-founder of Connext. This is a lad who truly understands the value of a truly universal interoperability protocol for the Web3 industry. He is a pioneer in the space and was previously a lead developer in scaling infrastructure for Ethereum, ever heard of it, and co-creator of the Moloch DAO, one of the earliest decentralized autonomous organization frameworks developed back in 2018. He's coming in hot from Lisbon. What a treat as well. Super pumped to have you, Arjun. How are you, my friend? Great to have you on.
Doing well. Thank you so much for having me. Excited to be here.
Super pumped to have you. We got to go back to the ETH days. Working on ETH, that must have been absolutely incredible. Before the show started, you and I were shooting shit for a bit. You mentioned that you were close to Canada where ETH sort of all went down in Toronto and Waterloo. Vitalik and all the other lads and lasses who developed ETH. It's crazy how, it was right in my backyard, and really when it was being built, like I don't ever remember hearing anything about this, not until I even, really got into crypto end of 2019, 2020. That's when you're like, holy shit, ETH was built in my backyard, which is sort of cool. Good story for another day. You are the star of the show here. Give us some good stories from your time building ETH. What was it like working with Vitalik? What was it like working with the rest of the team? Did you work on anything in particular that was super cool on ETH? Give us some good stories and then we'll jump into Connext and everything else we have on the docket for today.
Yeah. So to clarify, I didn't actually work on Ethereum itself. I built a bunch of infrastructure on top of Ethereum, starting in, 2016. That said, I think everything in that time was it was so early and the community was quite small and so it was a little bit nebulous as to like who was actually working on the core protocol and who wasn't. And I think a lot of people were just contributing in a bunch of different ways, which is really awesome. I did build a bunch of early infrastructure, helped build a bunch of early infrastructure, and also just sort of was around a lot in the early days amongst the developer ecosystem. So I started the San Francisco Ethereum developers meetup with a bunch of other people. And I believe that ended up becoming one of the largest Ethereum meetups, and really was the starting point for a bunch of projects that then launched out of there. So I think the early, a lot of the 2017 ICO era kind of came out of that specific meetup, which is really cool. Some of the early infrastructure I worked on back in 2016, I was working with a couple of people trying to abstract away gas and the complexity of dealing with gas. And we were trying to find good ways to make it so that you could hook up a card or hook up payment in some other asset. And then that way, as a developer, you didn't need to have to actually get your users to pay gas for every transaction. It was awesome because this was obviously even then was such a huge problem. And now today we're still talking about things like account abstraction. And so it's cool that it's cool that there was a really relevant problem. It's slightly less cool that, now almost, 8 years later, we're still working on it. I think other cool stories from that time, people always talk about how crypto is the Wild West, but it was truly the Wild West at this time. Even the infrastructure itself was kind of ludicrous. I think a lot of people forget how extraordinarily unstable Ethereum was in the ICO era because, the whole chain was just being taken down by coin launches every week. It was just sort of this really just kind of funny to watch how everybody was just sort of panicking all the time. Anytime there was every time there was an ICO, projects that were trying to build businesses on top of the chain would have to tell their users, oh, by the way, we're just not going to be available for the next 6 hours. I'm sorry, we can't do anything about it.
Classic.
It's pretty funny. But I'd like to think that we've come a long way since then. It's at the very least, things might get really expensive now, but at the very least, it's a bit of a smoother curve where you're not just oh, wow, I can't get any transactions to the chain for hours and hours on end. So we started Connext in 2017. At the time, and I think this is still the thesis. The thesis was just, I really believe in this technology a lot. I think Ethereum represents the best hope that humanity has to be able to build ways to coordinate with each other at a scale that is completely unprecedented. And I think a lot of the problems that we face today are fundamentally at their core just coordination failures, right? We failed to effectively capture the longer term financial risks of things like global warming. And as a result of that, the incentives today to hedge against those longer term financial risks don't exist. And as a result of that, we're in this broken economic system where we fail to coordinate and continue to deplete resources today at the expense of tomorrow. and run the similar like mental arguments around things like income inequality, access to food, really just about every problem that we faced at scale in the world right now. And Ethereum, and this is really the reason that I became really interested in the space, Ethereum really feels like not the solution to it, but basically how you could build the solution. It's a platform on top of which you could build these like new public goods, it's like a new market category of things that is not corporations, it's not governments, it's now this other thing that looks more like the internet, right? A global public good that is just truly neutral, is non-sovereign, is non-corporate, exists everywhere. And we've all seen the enormous benefit that the internet has had for the world. I mean, obviously there's a lot of like bad things that have happened as a result of it, but I think everyone would say that it's really pushed human. Exactly.
100%. Yeah.
So our thesis back then and still now is, how can we figure out how to make this technology actually usable? And as it turns out, that was quite difficult.
Still working on it.
Exactly. So 2017, when we started, we kind of initially started with some hypotheses around things like user onboarding with cards and things like that. And we started on like talking to users and working with a bunch of projects at the time. A lot of projects were folks that had just recently raised money in their ICOs, and what we learned time and time again was that even though a lot of these projects were saying, okay, yeah, we need a way to like onboard users to be able to purchase our token or to be able to use like stable coins in our system. What we found time and time again was that when push came to shove, they really all had one core problem, which was just that their applications were just way too expensive to use because Ethereum wasn't scalable. And this is when we kind of realized, okay, there's this Ethereum scalability problem. Initially, we didn't realize how big of a problem it was. So we started to, we kind of knew that people had been talking about it. So we were like, okay, we'll just build a scalability solution and then upsell them on a card payment API. Obviously, terrible idea. We got about like a few weeks into that before realizing, oh, actually the scalability thing is like, a much, much bigger, much more interesting problem than like card payments. And that was when we kind of made a full pivot. And Connext became one of the first organizations that was working in the space building scalability systems on top of Ethereum. We, at the time, I think it was like just a handful of orgs. Raiden was the one that was like most well known because they'd just done their ICO. And of course, everybody was making corollaries to like the Lightning Network there. And then there was us. We were very, very small fish. Not a ton of people knew about us at the time, at least. And then there was a few others. So there was things like XDAI, which is a sidechain. And then a few people trying to like build plasma systems. So Matic, which of course became Polygon, Loom, which unfortunately shut down, but one of the co-founders, Georgios, is pretty well known in the space now. It works at Paradigm, and then a few other kind of teams that were like us, like just sort of longer tail, looking to research these things. We started working again. It truly was the Wild West. We started trying to find users wherever we could get them. The main project that we found that actually had traction at the time was SpankChain, an adult payment network. Really, the only people doing any consistent volume.
You said SpankChain?
SpankChain. Yep.
Come on. Sorry, keep going there. Keep going.
Yeah, 2018 era Ethereum. There was, 2017 era Ethereum. There was really nobody with any traction. And SpankChain was doing like, I think it was like 20K to 30K monthly volume. And that was like one of the most used applications that we'd found at the time, which is crazy. Exactly. And so we partnered really closely with them. They had their own in-house scaling research team. We like worked really closely with them, and together with them built the first kind of real like L2 on top of Ethereum, like the first general purpose L2 that could be used by any project. And this was in 2018. Now, largely at the time, we were focused around payments. Payments as a vertical just didn't really take off as much as we expected for SpankChain or really for anybody. I think it was just, it was like one of those really interesting red herrings where everyone was convinced that payments was going to be the thing that got PMF first, but it ended up being DeFi. And even to this day, payments is still like, it's happening now, but it's still like in the earliest days. So we kind of saw that there was this like shift in the market towards DeFi. And we also saw that there was the research was going in the direction of rollups. And we'd been working on a different type of technology called state channels. And a lot of our really, really awesome, smart, talented friends, folks like Plasma Group, like formerly Omise Go people that then spun out and became Optimism, or like the Off-Chain Labs team that then went on to develop Arbitrum. Yeah. You know, we just realized that there was all these really awesome people that were working on rollup frameworks. And we were like, okay, maybe it's better for us to focus on actually solving some of the more critical problems in rollups than to like double down on this other scalability technology, which is not really as interesting right now. And in the process of asking that question, we realized all of those projects had a single shared problem, which was how do you get into and out of their ecosystems? And how do you even get between their ecosystems? Everyone was gunning to be like the Ethereum L2. And it was very unclear whether like that, it was very clear that that wasn't really going to happen, right? There was just too many people that too interested in that problem. And so we, in 2020, ended up building the first bridge. We built the first kind of like system to transfer tokens non-custodially between rollups on testnet, and then took it to mainnet in 2021. And that was really like the entry point to kind of getting into this like whole interoperability world. Now, the interesting thing about interop, and I think a lot of people don't really realize this, is that like bridging and scalability are actually the same problem fundamentally. A rollup is actually just a construction for how you can bridge to another chain, where if you make some, like you basically make some compromises on how you define another chain as a chain, and instead of defining it as a chain, you define it as this sort of like sub-chain of something else. If you do that, then you can make a trustless two-way bridge to and from that chain. This was kind of like the big realization that led us to developing rollups. And so for us, making the jump from like, hey, we're thinking about this technology related to scaling to like now we're working on interop was actually just, we didn't even need to change our code. We actually just took the exact same code and reused it elsewhere, which is pretty interesting. It's kind of interesting to see that the space has of course progressed a lot. A lot has been built and it's grown so much over the course of the last, I would say, almost decade now. But a lot of the problems, a lot of the core questions are almost exactly the same. It's the same things we were asking each other back in 2017, 2018 that are the things that people are asking today. Yeah.
Exact same. That was a great little spiel there. What a way to kick off the pod. I think we have to go back to sort of first base here, which is Ethereum's scalability problem. This is something you and the team are working on. Is there like one specific issue? Do you think it is interoperability? Like you mentioned payments, but now you also mentioned that payments isn't as big of an issue as we think, as many teams started to work on it and then said, shit, there's bigger fish to fry. We're going to go somewhere else. Like, again, I know you and the team are working on it, so I'm asking you a bit of a cop-out question, but like, what is Ethereum's biggest scalability problem right now? And like, what is the sort of most front-of-mind solution to that problem?
For sure. Let's, I guess, define what the scalability problem is, because I think you're right. I did jump the gun a little bit there. We all know blockchains don't scale at this point. It's something that ends up getting talked about a lot, and it manifests itself in a bunch of different ways for users, right? So for users, blockchains not scaling means like really high gas costs, really high like low transaction times, things like that. The process of simply making costs cheaper is not actually very difficult. You can increase block sizes. You can basically increase the requirements needed for people to run the chain and run a chain on a supercomputer, and all of a sudden the whole chain is operating faster. The thing with blockchains is that the way that they're designed is that there's like a minimum threshold of infrastructure requirements needed to run a node, and like the whole chain runs as fast as the slowest node, really. And so if you're willing to make compromises on what is going to go into a node, and you're willing to kind of run those nodes on like AWS clusters or on a supercomputer, then your chain can be extremely fast and extremely cheap. The challenge is, of course, that then it's not decentralized. And this is the big trade-off space that people are trying to explore. Is like, okay, how do we come up with a system where you can have people running any kind of application they want? They can be cheap and fast. And on top of that, it can still be validated by people at home, right? You don't necessarily need it to only be in the hands of a few small corporations or like Amazon, basically.
100%. One quick point, if I may. Would you say that sort of just as a sexy one-line framework, could it be distilled to like speed versus decentralization? Is that like one of the main sort of questions that's being asked? Yeah,
it's like there's this thing that Vitalik had posted a while back called the scalability trilemma, and effectively it's just that. It's like speed versus decentralization.
Gotcha. Okay. Sorry to interrupt there. Keep going. You're on a roll. All you.
Yeah. So the question then comes like, okay, well, if you're not willing to make compromises on one or the other, how can we get to some other option? Initially back in 2017, 2018, the thought process was like, well, why don't we try to build more like tailored things on top of? So like, why don't we like batch up a bunch of transactions off chain and like post only those batches on chain, and have that like batching system be sort of more tailored, more like application specific, right? So this was the reason for our like payments focused L2 was we were like, well, instead of making one payment every minute on like off chain or on chain, why don't we just like make one payment every 10 minutes and then have a coordination game off chain where you can be sure that every individual payment is not getting lost. That's not like particularly challenging to do. But the problem that we inevitably ran into was just like, you want to create this, very, very general compute system. So ideally, the scalability system should also be more general. And I think that this is kind of the direction that the whole ETH space started to go, was like, well, why don't we, instead of trying to like really, really specialize on creating this like payment specific scalability system that people have to do a custom integration into. Everybody at the time was just like, I just want to build contracts. I don't want to have to go and do a bunch of extra work. So that created this whole like EVM compatible narrative of like, let's find ways to build EVM compatible scalability systems. So let's like literally just have something that looks like a chain just way faster. And that way people don't ever really need to know that they're not operating on chain. They're just, like it's just effectively the same developer experience. And rollups is kind of how we accomplish that. And so the rollup thesis is actually it's similar. You are taking a bunch of transactions, batching them up off chain, and then putting only like one like batch on chain. But it's like different in the sense of like, instead of running something that's like very specific to do that, at least in the past. Now, of course, the narrative is changing. So people are creating like application specific rollups and like rollups in whatever languages and things like that. These things just always go in loops. But at the time, the thinking was like, okay, well, what we can do is just split up Ethereum's execution, like the things that people are doing on chain, and run a bunch of those things in parallel to each other and have them only post it to Ethereum every now and then. And by doing that, you can have node operators validating one part of the execution without having to validate all of it. And that means now you improve scalability because you're effectively like parallel processing things on chain, right? Everybody doesn't need to process every transaction anymore. You can process some subset of transactions and still have the same security, which is awesome. That is really the core scalability thesis. It's just like make it so that there is more optionality around what transactions are being processed by nodes. So why is it hard? Now, of course, I think in general, one of the big answers to that question is that building any kind of distributed systems technology in general is really, really difficult.
It's nightmare. It's nightmare fuel.
It's insane. And it always takes so much longer than you'd expect. Like I remember I had gotten into a disagreement at a conference once with Dan Robinson about this, where he and I were like kind of talking about like, well, does it make more sense to have like something that's application specific, like what we were doing, where that is hyper optimized and can do like 10,000, 100,000x scalability out of the box? Or does it make more sense to like do a rollup, which at the time was just giving like a 10x scalability improvement, and then iterate on it in the future? And for what it's worth, I do agree that the latter is actually a better option, but for different reasons. And his argument was like, well, we should do the rollup because optimistic rollups, like they're really simple constructions. We can ship an optimistic rollup and have it be like with fault proofs and everything within like a few months. Like the timeline is months, not many years.
Right.
And this was like, I think this was 2019 or 2020, start of 2020. So obviously like, despite the fact that optimistics or rollups are supposed to be like a relatively simple construction that, was something that people really thought was going to be like the stepping stone to get to something else. It's still now years later, we're still working on fraud proofs. We're still working on like answering some of these like basic infrastructure questions. If I'm being totally honest, I think Ethereum has solved scalability. Like I think the question of like, can you do fast and cheap transactions is now answered, right? You can just go to Arbitrum or Optimism or Polygon or zkSync and do very fast and very cheap transactions. I think the secondary question though now is like, how do you do that in a way where users are not having to think about going to Optimism or Arbitrum or zkSync or Polygon?
Exactly. There's so much friction. Arjun, I did a transaction literally last week. I opened up MetaMask. It was $49. I was like, are you effing kidding me right now? Boom. Like, you know what I mean? Like, again, I always use the example of my parents or even someone perhaps a little bit older than us who isn't as crypto-centric and tech savvy as we are. I mean, you and I are, it's a complete diss to you to put us in the same boat. So my apologies for that, but you get the point here. It's like, it just can't happen, candidly. Like it needs to be as simple as sending a transaction on MetaMask in a Chrome extension, couple clicks, but it can't be $49 to send a 3-4 figure value. You know what I mean? Like what's the solution for this right now? Like what is the easiest way to use ARB or something else, or OP to like actually make it happen?
Yeah, I mean, it's still not solved, right? Like the way that the last market, so this became a problem in the last bull market when like we suddenly had this like big expansion of chains all of a sudden. And why did we have that big expansion of chains? Because Ethereum just became way too expensive to use, and we were onboarding all of these users coming in from Southeast Asia and like India and like like Korea and other places where like a $150 bridge transaction was just not going to make any sense ever.
No.
And what we saw, and this is actually where Connext got a lot of our early traction, was that we just saw everybody was playing the like ETH floors lava game. Nobody wanted to touch Ethereum. Everyone is like onboarding directly into like Binance chain, because that was really the main chain that had a centralized exchange integration that was not Ethereum. And we saw like everybody, like we could kind of see this in our own like stats and analytics. Like everybody was basically onboarding to Binance chain and then going from there to go farm tokens on like on every other chain. And then once they were done farming, going back to Binance chain to catch out. And no one was touching Ethereum if they could help it. And so that was kind of like the first step, which was like, let's solve the absolutely awful cost pain point by just not ever onboarding to Ethereum ever. But then the second step of that is like, well, there was still this really awful experience where despite all of this, like, users were, because we were in this bull market, because, everybody was incentive mining, like, if you're paying users a ton of potentially, thousands of dollars, they're going to claw over each other to get to your product. Like they will figure it out. But like in practice, that's not in any way sustainable, right? So what we found when talking to these users was like, they were extraordinarily confused. They had already gone through the extremely painful process of learning how to like download MetaMask and set up a wallet and manage wallet recovery and like then get gas fees and like basically onboards to Binance chain and have like their wallet set up. And now you were telling them, hey, okay, so now, by the way, there's not just one chain. There's many different chains. The application you're on could be on any one of these chains. And if you go to the application UI, it's not going to tell you how to get to the app. You can't just use it. You have to figure out what chain it's on. You have to find a bridge that works with that chain and has liquidity on it. You have to go bridge your funds. Then you have to figure out how to get gas for the new chain. And then you have to go and use the app. And so that's obviously, absolutely. I mean, it's just crazy to expect a user to do that. And so that's really fundamentally the problem that we kind of set out to fix. It's like, we were like, okay, ideally what should happen is that it should just be like when you use YouTube today. When you use YouTube, you just look up videos of cats and you just get videos of cats and you watch the videos of cats and that's it. There's not anything else. You don't need to know that like when you're actually searching for videos of cats, Google is like searching through their extremely complex distributed data system, like behind the scenes. Like you don't need to know that where that specific video is like backed up in their server cluster and how to get there. That's insane, right? That's like not like we moved past this point of the internet in the 1980s. And it's really good that we did, because if we hadn't, nobody would have ever used it.
You hold up. You just brought up a great point there. And this is something that I've thought about many times. Even again, the other day, I'll use an example, sending a transaction a couple of weeks ago, opened up a new wallet for reason XYZ. Heck, I forget what it was. This happens so often. And there's no there's no ETH in the wallet. So I can't send the next transaction because I'm just sending Tether over. Even though I have Tether on ERC, it doesn't matter. I still need ETH. Using your analogy about YouTube, I'm a YouTube premium guy. For all the listeners at home, I think, and my apologies, might lose some subs here. You're bonkers if you don't have YouTube premium. You have to. Ads are the worst. It's like the easiest, for me, Canadian, like $14 a month. It's probably the best subscription I own, like dead ass. Anyways, what would be the equivalent if having gas in your wallet is the equivalent of having YouTube premium? What would be the equivalent of just having regular YouTube where you can still fulfill and execute transactions, but you don't have gas in your wallet? Is there a way that we can like have ads in wallets? Like what the heck can we do so people don't have to get through this having initial gas problem? Because that's something that I think is absolutely fucked with a capital F and something that needs to be fixed pronto.
For sure. Yeah. I think, I think the real solution to that is like account abstraction. Really the thing the problem that you're talking about here is exactly the problem that we were trying to fix in like 2016. Unfortunately, the infrastructure just didn't exist to fix it. And it's exactly what you were saying. We were basically like, well, this is kind of awful. Like, so either developers should be able to hook up their cards to pay for gas for users, or users should be able to just hook up their cards and then like you should just be able to add your credit card to MetaMask and then like go and do a bunch of things on chain. And then like later, once you're done doing things on chain, like once a month, it just debits you.
You get dinged. Yeah.
Yeah. That actually, people are now building that experience. Like that actually is starting to exist now, which is kind of cool. I think it'll be some time before it becomes like really, really well adopted, because of course there's just sort of adoption hurdles associated with accounts. So let's take a step back. So what is account abstraction? You'll hear a lot of abstraction related terms. And I think it's important because abstraction basically means getting rid of the need for the user to have to think about XYZ. So account abstraction is getting rid of the need for the user to actually have to deal with the account, like the wallet that you're using. So the wallet that you're using most of the time is just like the end address, the end account. And The accounts are great in that they're really simple. Like it's just an address. So you can write down like some words on a piece of paper and that actually represents your account. And like you have everything you need. But they're also not great because if you lose that piece of paper, you've lost the account and you've also lost all of your money. And similarly, because the account itself is an end address, the only way to actually do things from it is for you to submit transactions chain and pay gas. And that's really like one of the big hurdles here is like having to deal with gas payments. So account abstraction removes a lot of that. It just you move to a new model where you have a smart account, which is a contract and not just like an end address. That smart account can be associated with many different addresses. So you can do things like have recovery. And the other thing that you can do is one of those addresses could be a relay or like, in I think account abstraction, the later account abstraction terms is called a paymaster. And basically is the service provider that just, when you sign transactions and you send them to the service provider and you just tell them, hey, I'm going to like pay you at the end of the month using my credit card, or I'm going to pay you using some other asset. Exactly. And they do it on your behalf. And that I think is just a way, way, way better experience. It's starting to happen. It will happen as like more and more of the wallets start to like adopt a contract, basically smart contract wallets, smart accounts.
I don't know how much money's in that, because like I feel like maybe I'm completely wrong there, but I don't know if the user would sign up if the fee would be over, call it 3%. I also feel like with 20% traditional credit card interest, like I feel like that'd be too spooky on crypto, especially if like that bill gets racked up quick and things go the other way, and then you're like no longer just minus 20 or minus 120 in the hole. That's and again, I've thought about this. Maybe I'm way off, but to
be honest, I think it may actually be cheaper.
Really?
Net cheaper. And the reason is that as a user, when you're sending your transaction, you're basically individually sending one transaction at a time to chain. You're probably overpaying for those transactions because you just want it to go and get mined, right? You're not optimizing on the process of like, I'm going to like monitor exactly how this transaction is happening and submit it most efficiently as possible. Whereas if you are a service provider whose job it is to process millions of transactions a day, there's a bunch of things that you can do. You can, for example, like batch those transactions and send them to chain in like lumps. You can work directly with builders, block builders on chain. So in that way, you're submitting the transactions directly to them, like going around the mempool. So that can like get rid of front running, for example. There's like a bunch of other constructions that people have talked about. So like there's folks that are creating like block space derivatives. So you can basically like purchase space in blocks at times when gas is cheaper and then like hold it for times when gas is more expensive and then use it then to like decrease your gas costs. It's like the moment that you turn it into this like competitive thing where now there's like a bunch of service providers that are competing with each other to like give the best possible experience for how you submit your transactions, all of a sudden the transaction experience just gets a lot better.
I love that. Arjun, you have been absolutely on fire. We have to take a quick break and give a huge shout out to the sponsor of the show, Prime XBT. And when we get back, we are going to get into a bit of a spicy topic, and that is the Sol versus ETH narrative. I've had a couple Sol maxis on the show over the last couple of weeks. One, I'm sure you follow him on Twitter, Ansem, BLK Noise, had him on the pod. He is the king of the Solana manlets right now. This guy is literally driving the Sol train. You are an ETH guy. We got to get into debate mode. But until then, huge shout out to Prime XBT, longtime friends and sponsors of the CryptoNews.com podcast. We love these guys as they offer a robust trading system for both beginners and professional traders. Doesn't matter if you're a rookie or a vet, you can easily design and customize your layouts and widgets to best fit your trading style. Prime XBT is also running an exclusive promotion for listeners of the Crypto News podcast. The promo code is CryptoNews50 to receive 50% of your deposit credited to your trading account. Again, that is CryptoNews50 to receive 50% of your deposit credited to your trading account. And now back to the show. Let's get right into it. Sol versus ETH. Everyone has been shitting on ETH recently. And I mean everyone. You're a Twitter guy. You know it too. I don't think it's deserved personally. Obviously, the reason why ETH is getting shat on is because Sol went from like $9 to $60 in, 3 months. And when a lot of people get rich, they're going to wear that ticker with pride. That's just how it works. Like what's everyone's favorite thing about crypto? It's easy money, right? Yeah. It's also very easy to get rinsed, but it's also the easiest money This is why, in my opinion, so many people are on the Sol train right now. You have Bonk, you have Dog with a Hat, you have just absolute shit coins that have no utility that have made people millions and millions of dollars, and everyone's on the train. Enough talking on my end. Give us the lowdown. What is good with this Sol versus ETH narrative? Do the Sol train people have any warrant? Do they have any actual sauce in their arguments? Or are we going to all see this come crashing down very shortly?
Yeah, it's a good question. I want to say in general, like it's really funny to kind of see there is like it's like once you're in the space for long enough, you see that there is literally a cycle, right? Like people will shit on ETH and then things will happen, and then they'll shit on something else, and it just comes back around. Like it's just really funny, and it's just a testament to like where we are in the market cycle that's happening. I have never been as hostile towards Solana, I think, as a lot of other ETH people. And to be honest, I don't think anybody that's like a really serious, like anybody that's like deeply involved in like technical research is necessarily like hostile towards it. I think everybody understands that like all of this stuff has a lot of trade-offs. And so like Ethereum's thesis is basically like, let's build the future of the internet, right? And like it's like, let's build this global platform for creating decentralized public goods that is intended to be truly uncensorable and is intended to be truly incorruptible. And like a core part of Ethereum's success criteria is if World War III happens, and I've literally heard Vitalik say this, by the way, like it's like a big part of the goal in the design is like, if and when World War III happens, ETH will survive it. It will survive it because there will be enough people. It's like ETH and Bitcoin will survive World War III because there will be enough people at home running ETH nodes that like you would need to like, it's like there's enough failover, there's enough backup happening. And that's kind of the goal, right? Is like you want to allow enough people individually at home to be able to like validate this thing, that if you go and blow up a bunch of data centers around the world, you're not going to get rid of the chain. The Solana thesis is slightly different. Solana's thesis is basically making a bet on two things. One, that there are intrinsically a bunch of use cases for blockchains that are not necessarily going to be like, let's make this thing as resilient as possible, right? There's like a bunch of use cases for distributed systems that achieve consensus out there today, and ones that have like an economic mechanism within it that are very performant or obviously very highly desirable. There's a lot of places where this has come up in the past, even before crypto existed, like gaming, for instance, where like people have been trying to build like infrastructure for gaming that solves a lot of the same problems that blockchains are trying to solve today, and they've been trying to do that for decades. So Solana's first bet is that there are intrinsically valuable applications of blockchains that are not necessarily going to be the applications that require you to have like World War III grade resilience. Right. And then bet number two is the pace at which computing is improving is going to be fast enough that by the time we get to the point where we figured out a lot of these like scalability questions at some point in the future, computing will have caught up, and we will at home be able to be running infrastructure that is so much more performant that we can then validate Solana nodes more easily in like basically like the pace of the improvements in computing is going to bring down the threshold at which you can start validating this stuff more easily as an individual rather than on a supercomputer. I don't think either of those theses are flawed. I think they're totally valid. I think that Solana is basically just taking another end of that trade-off spectrum where they're saying, okay, you know what, we're willing to sacrifice some decentralization to get performance. And in doing that, we're not having to deal with like the complexity of a scalability roadmap. We're not having to deal with like the fragmentation of many different chains. And I think all of that is really, really valid and very true. The limitation here is that like, we of course don't yet know what use cases fall into category one, right? So like, we live in a time today where we're basically in crypto summertime. Like there's a couple of nation states that are attempting to attack projects building on Ethereum, and it's like North Korea basically trying to hack people. Not trying to, very successfully hacking a lot of projects. Like I think there's a Taylor from My Crypto did the analysis, I think, and I saw her post a tweet where she found that on average, Lazarus, which is like the North Korean like hacking group, had stolen $2 million per day last year from each project, which is insane.
Per day.
Per day.
Oh my goodness.
Absolutely insane. So, I think there is something to be said about like we need to be conscious of the fact that rogue nation states can and will attempt to attack these chains. But aside from that, right, like we're still in a summertime situation where, major governments have not actively banned crypto. most governments are still willing to kind of entertain the conversations around it. Their regulators are very interested in talking about it. Like there's pushback. And of course, there's like hostility coming from certain types of organizations. And there's a lot of confusion and lack of clarity. But we're not in a situation where people have actually initiated a war on crypto. Like, in the 1980s, 1990s, there was actually a war on crypto. And like that, there was like very explicit attempts to find ways to like shut down anything related to the technology that we're working on. At the time, it was around cryptography. But right now, we're not in that situation. And so to that extent, I think Solana is right in that like going for gold with like making this the most decentralized system possible is probably anti-productive to like focusing on adoption. But the flip side of it is that it's really hard to put it back in the box once you've already done it. So like if Solana goes and does get a ton of adoption, and then at some point in the future, World War III happens, they're just going to be in a like not as good of a position.
Well, I mean, isn't the position literally just like turn off the light switch? Like, wouldn't it? It'd be pretty easy to turn off Sol, would it not?
I think so. Like it's basically the way that Solana stands right now. I think it would basically be like blowing up like AWS Center, like server stacks and things like that. Like as long as you kind of like got rid of some of the key infrastructure that is powering Solana, it would be easier to take down than something like Ethereum, which is running validators all over the world. Again, this is a little bit of a horseshoes and hand grenades conversation because of course we're talking about like exactly. I think the main kind of takeaway here is it ultimately comes down to like what you believe the value of this infrastructure is, and like what do you believe the threat model is. So like from an adoption perspective, it is absolutely valid to take the position that you're like, no, you know what, this technology is really important and we need to get it into as many people's hands as fast as possible, and we need to just onboard them into the space. So like let's just make the compromises now and hope that the technology catches up to the point where it can become democratized in the future. Whereas there's another argument that also to be made, which is just that like for all of these kinds of systems, power corrupts. And so like doing it right from the get-go, focusing more on decentralization, focusing more on like making sure that this is as egalitarian as possible, even if it comes at the cost of adoption, while it means moving slower, will ensure more resilience in the future. And resilience is fundamentally the thing that determines what will survive longer term.
I love that. Arjun, you've been on fire. As I've said many times, this pod's been a treat. This is definitely one that I will have to listen to on a nice walk as well. Just very refreshing. We do have a couple more questions, then we got to wrap up. We are getting tight for time. 2024 outlook. Give us a couple hot takes, preferably. And if you don't have hot takes, just regular good old lukewarm takes will do as well. Anything ETH related, anything sort of macro narrative related. And again, the hotter the better. I'd love some stuff that like not everyone is saying. If you have any of that locked and loaded, that'd be a treat.
Yeah. I mean, I think there's a bunch of like tech trends. I think bridging is going to get quite interesting. So I'm like we're sort of seeing that there was just way too many projects that were kind of funded to try to solve this problem in the last like couple of years. Way too many. It's insane. Like 50 to 100. It's insane.
5 mil for you, 5 mil for you, 5 mil for you, and it's like your bridge is shit. Like,
exactly.
I'm being rude. I'm not working on bridges, but like, come on.
Yeah,
it's crazy.
And it makes sense. It's a huge problem, right? It's like basically, it's like it's all going to be chains and bridges, right? There's not going to be anything else. Is the interchain. And so it's like it's at least as valuable as all of the chains combined, at least. Yeah. And I think I think people are really, really underestimating that. But the flip side of it is that, again, similar to chains, like just having copy pasta chains is not going to make a difference. Like it's not fundamentally doing anything new. The thing that really changes how you're like what is valuable is going to be like specializing. And so I think with with what we've been seeing with like the modular narrative for chains and like people specializing into becoming rollups or DA layers or settlement layers, we're starting to see the same thing with bridging as well, where like projects are going to start specializing into like transport layers, security layers, or intent/execution layers. Connext is focusing on the latter, and we've always kind of focused on the latter. So we don't roll our own security for bridging. We actually plug into like the roll-up bridges. We plug into like other canonical bridges. And what we do is we run like a layer on top of everything. It's kind of a layer 2 on top of bridges, where our network just guarantees transactions go through as quickly as possible. We have an off-chain network of what we call routers. Now in the new terminology, it'd be called intent fillers. And those are the people that like make all these transactions happen. I think that pattern is going to become very, very popular in 2024. So I would say like 2024 is going to be the year of like modularization of bridging, and then specifically the massive expansion of this intent layer, because that is really what's needed to do what we talked about on this call today, which is like abstract away all of the user experience hurdles and get to the point where this stuff actually makes sense. So that's point number one. I think we're going to continue seeing the expansion of many, many more rollups. I think next year we're going to start seeing people actually selling rollups to legacy organizations. My hot take here is that I know every VC and that I've talked to, or not every VC, but a lot of VCs are very interested in like consumer applications because they're like, oh, where are the users? Who's going to bring the users? And from my perspective, I'm like, yeah, I think there's going to be like a few big consumer hits this cycle. But I think the vast majority of the actual usage is not going to come from people building new applications, because it's like, if you're building a new social app, you have to grow to become the size of Facebook. That's going to take like half a decade at least, even in an optimistic case.
And so, if you get lucky too.
Yeah, exactly. If you're lucky enough to make it. Whereas the flip side of that is like, we know Reddit wants to build, on-chain. We know that like a lot of these other ecosystems have like made very conscious efforts to try to build on-chain constructions. They've failed to in the past because they've had to like go and build a bunch of custom infrastructure, basically build an entirely new blockchain. Whereas now you can give them a system, a rollup that runs in their server stack, that you can actually build like a data model for it that looks almost exactly like their existing databases. And you can then connect that, you can have them like connected to the actual rest of the blockchain ecosystem at will. I think that's going to be how we like Trojan horse this stuff into Web2 organizations. And that's where the users will come from. I mean, new applications are obviously important, but I think a lot of it is just going to be like older applications being like, oh, we could just do this one simple thing and then now suddenly have stuff on chain. And then I think lastly, I think we're finally at the point now where we're really having those hard conversations around user experience. So like I'm, after all of these years, I'm now finally at the point where I'm like, this is the year I'm really hoping that account abstraction takes off. This is the year. I really, really, really hoping that's the case, because even I'm really tired of having to deal with like gas, and so I think it's awful for everybody, even if you're a person in this space.
It's a nightmare.
Yeah.
Absolute nightmare. I love this. This was an incredible episode. Thank you so much for coming on, and definitely an open invite for round 2. We have to have you on for round 2. I mean, I wish we weren't tight for time here, but c'est la vie. Before you go, can you please let our listeners know where they can find you and Connext online and on socials?
Awesome. Yeah. You can find me on Twitter at Arjun Bhuptani. I guess my name will be in the thing, so you can, in case you need help spelling it.
You got it. Yeah.
And then Connext's Twitter is at Connext Network. I'd also recommend joining our Discord, to discord.gg/Connext, or checking out our landing page, which is connext.network.
Amazing. Arjun, you were absolutely on fire today. Really appreciate you coming on. Can't wait for round 2, and wishing you and the team a wonderful new year, and can't wait to see what you guys are cooking up in the near future.
Thanks so much, Matt. Really appreciate you having me here.
Folks, what an episode with Arjun Bhuptani. He was absolutely on fire today, folks. Co-founder of Connext. Guys, this was an absolute masterclass in anything ETH related. We talked about ETH scalability problems, account abstraction, Sol versus ETH narrative, absolutely everything, building the future of the internet. This is one that I will be listening to again myself. I really hope you guys enjoyed this one. If you did, please like and subscribe. It would mean the world to the team and I. Speaking of the team, love you guys. Eustace, my amazing editor, you are the man. And back to the listeners, love you guys. Keep on growing those bags and keep on staying healthy, wealthy, and happy. Bye for now, and we'll talk soon.